Welcome everyone to this live premiere of my interview with Mark Doty. I've been wanting to interview Mark for many, many years. I've been very much impressed by his poetry. I was particularly struck, I remember reading a poem called Homo Will Not Inherit and Lament Heaven, wonderful elegies to his friends dying of AIDS. He wrote this whole series of elegies, but I've really enjoyed his work. It feels like his poems, and you'll see this in the interview, they're like sort of glitter dragged through the streets of New York, dragged through love and sex. He was a wonderful man to interview. I found him incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly friendly. I think you're going to really enjoy this interview. So sit back and enjoy Mark Doty talking about his poetry. So really lovely to have you at poetryEast, Mark. I've been wanting to get Mark for years. I've been sort of chasing him. So let's talk first of all about your choice. So let's start with that wonderful Bishop poem.
Beautifully read, by the way. Thank you. That poem is a great act of imaginative entry into another being. And what I love about it so much is that there's very little narration in that poem. I caught a tremendous fish. He didn't fight at all. I held it out of the water. And then she begins to describe and describe and describe for a page and a half until she comes to that final line, and I let the fish go. So what happens in the poem is very, very minimal. On the level of action, what happens on the level of observation, reverie, daydream, entering into the life of another creature is extraordinary. Her eye moves across the surface of the fish. She compares it to wallpaper with roses. She enters inside the body of the fish, thinking about the packed entrails, the swim bladder like a peony. And you hear how her comparisons are linking disparate things all the time, the natural and the homemade, the wild and the domestic. The swim bladder is like a big pink peony. And Bishop takes great delight in just looking and involving us in how she sees. So she really is not so interested in making statements about the world, but involving her readers in coming with her through a process of finding knowledge, coming towards perception. And I just find that the most thrilling thing, to be a part of that acute, beautiful process of coming to know the world. How wonderful to get to go there. And it's such permission to look and to say that perception is itself an interesting activity, and that if you pay attention to perception, you will be rewarded for doing so. There is a value in knowing as closely and intimately as you can.
Yeah, great. That's and about the Cavafy. So nice to have Cavafy. We've not had someone read a Cavafy poem before. That's so wonderful.
It's a beautiful poem. Well, in a way, it's the opposite, isn't it? From great fullness of speech to really spare. Cavafy wastes nothing. So that line over there, the bed, the afternoon sun used to touch half of it. Heartbreaking is the image of the warmth of that light where another body once lay. The poem tells us very little about the couple. We don't know how long they were together. We know so little about what was between them, and yet the speaker in that poem knows where the vases were, the furniture, how they were used. He returns to that room. Again, he's taking us through a process of assembling in memory a vanished space. Cavafy loved rooms, spaces. He remembered chandeliers and mirrors and objects and how they were containers for feeling. And you might argue that his poems are mementos and snapshots of those places because there was nothing there he could keep. This is Alexandria, this is northern Cairo, this is northern Egypt in the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th century. Setting up housekeeping with the beloved is not so much of an option for him. What he can do is write a poem, construct a poetry which remembers these encounters, be they some indefinite period of time, or be they just a moment. And many of his poems are simply evocations of encounters where two men meet over the handkerchiefs in a shop, or they catch one another's gaze in a mirror, or are having a drink together in a cafe. And that's all. But it's all we need to recollect a life of connection, of longing, of tenderness. They're extraordinarily beautiful poems, and their way of containing loss and remembering what is lost, to me, prefigured something about what I would need to do as a gay man living in the teeth of an epidemic in the crisis years. What do we do with constant disappearance? Now, this is obviously not exclusive to me or to people who belong to my category. We all live in the face of constant disappearance. How do we maintain some equanimity? How do we maintain connection to what we love and what disappears? What do we make of it? I guess one of the signatures of an artistic temperament is whatever it is you're given, you need to make something out of it. You need to find a form which will serve to contain what is most crucial to you, what presses most against you. Wallace Stevens, we talked about the other day, talked about the pressure of reality. And the way that the pressure of reality, whatever our most difficult, most dire situations might be, required the imagination to respond. And for me, Cavafy and Bishop both actually point ways in which imagination could participate in the world, respond to our delight and our sorrow.
Indeed. Really lovely to have both of them. Very beautiful. I want to start, before kind of work our way towards your work, thought we'd actually start with you and your life. And I actually thought we'd start with your parents. There are two apparitions that appear in Deep Lane. Your mother saying, for instance, "I never meant to harm you." And then there's a lovely poem quite soon after that about your father, another apparition saying, "Mark is making the house pretty," and saying it, as you say in the poem, in gentleness, not mockery. So I wonder whether you might introduce us to your... It's the first time I've seen your parents in the poems.
Right. Like many young poets, I was interested in writing about my family way back. And in my first book, which was not published over here, first and second books actually, I was interested in situating myself as an adult and looking at where I had come from. Who were these people? Who were this family who had helped to shape my life? And by the time I had finished the second book, my partner, Wally Roberts, had tested positive for HIV. This was in 1987, and the test was very new. We really didn't know what it meant. Maybe he was going to get sick. Maybe he was going to die of AIDS, but we didn't know that for sure. My test was negative, but what did that mean? And so it was very vague. What we had as a result of that was a vague form of knowledge. It was as if the mortal sword that hangs over everybody's head just dropped, 6 feet lower. And what should we do? How should we live knowing that? And one of the things that happened without me choosing it was I just totally lost interest in writing about the past. I wanted to talk about adult life and how we now contend with this news. And so my work changed radically. And I basically kicked my parents out of it for many, many years. I was born in East Tennessee in the 1950s, middle of the last century. My father was an Army engineer. My mother was a housewife, frustrated painter, and alcoholic. She was from Sweetwater, Tennessee. He was from Granite City, Illinois. They were small town folk who, because of changes in American culture in World War II, moved out of this great suburban diaspora. They moved from town to town to town, towns in which they knew no one. And so we were an isolated bunch. I remember probably 6 houses at least before I started school. And I went to probably 7 schools before I did not graduate from high school. And so it was very uprooting, very disruptive. And my parents' isolation, my mother's, I think, the frustration of longing for a creative life in a community that she didn't have, had very dire consequences. Household became violent, dangerous. I had to get out of there when I was 16, 17 to survive, basically. So you can see why I wasn't particularly eager to return to writing about those years. I wrote a memoir called Firebird, which was published over here. And that book was a way of trying to make a container for that story, make it a little more, to complete it.
I mean, earlier this week when we were talking about Stevens, you were talking about hymns, and was it your mother playing hymns?
Oh, well, we were, particularly when I was very young, first 7 years of my life, we lived in East Tennessee, and also all around Tennessee. So Southern Protestants, summer nights, we sat in the swing in the front porch and we sang Rock of Ages and Sing Low Sweet Chariot and all these beautiful songs. And I love that. My grandmother, my father's mother, was a kind of fundamentalist who believes the last days are coming soon, and she was excited about that idea. She had a big green rocking chair, and she would put me on her lap, and she would read the Book of Revelation to me, which I was great. I loved it. Seals and horsemen of the apocalypse and the beast rising out of the waters and all of that. It was gloriously imagistic and wild. And from her, this was underpinned by just absolute unconditional love. And because we left when I was a kid, I never got much of the punitive side of Christianity. So that was kind of nice. That stuff came along later. I forgot the question, but I was enjoying myself.
Moving along in your life, and obviously I'm very aware it's Pride today, and so I thought, especially coming from where you come from with your the lifestyle, the world you came from, I thought you might be good to hear about your own kind of coming out story.
Oh, sure. Well, gosh, let's start with that. Well, I knew so clearly when I was 5 years old. My sister had a boyfriend who had curly black hair and looked like Elvis. And the first time I saw him was at the swimming pool where he was a lifeguard and he was doing bench presses. And I was just, and then he came over to our house on a hot day on his motorcycle. and so, he's just wearing a pair of jeans and he puts me on the back of the motorcycle, my arms around his belly, and he takes me for a ride around the block. And butterflies were just crazy. So, it was very clear. It was also extremely clear to me early on that this was not the direction in which one's, emotional, aesthetic, sexual interest was supposed to go. Affectional, it just could not be. And so I tried to keep it tamped down. I'm sure it was not in the least bit successful. I have a very distinct memory. In fourth grade, and this is a story that gives my memoir Firebird its title. My teacher, who loved creativity, valued her students' creativity above all else, would play Stravinsky on the Victrola, with that phonograph, and we pushed the chairs back against the wall, and we'd stand in the middle until the children were filled up by the music, and she would say, "Now, move." And I excelled at this. I was really, really good at modern dance. To the extent that on another day, she told the class to move our desks back against the wall again. And she said, "Now, for the other kids, you could draw, you could color, read, whatever you'd like to do. Mark is going to dance for us." And I, at 10 years old, in my Husky Boy jeans from Sears, did a solo performance of the Firebird for the class. Where did that come from? It was just in complete defiance of the gender expectations of 1963 in Tucson, Arizona. And thrilling to me. I love losing myself in the world of what people made. So from a really early age, painting and music, dance were just crucial things to me. So really coming out did not happen for a while. When I was 16 in high school, I was deeply miserable. I just felt lost there. My family had fallen apart. There was no solace in that. I had to go to PE class, every day, which was basically like masculinity drill camp, and the kids who did not succeed were pretty well tormented, to the point that at the beginning of the beginning of my junior year in high school, there was a doctor's office that I walked by on my way from school to home, and I went into the doctor's office one day, and the nurse said, "Do you have an appointment?" I said, "No, I just like to see the doctor." And she said, "Okay," and she went away. She said, "Okay, doctor will see you." And I said, I'm homosexual and I can't handle PE. He said, "Do your parents know this? Do you?" I said, "No." And he looked at me for a minute and he got out a prescription pad and he wrote a note that said, "Mark Doty is excused from PE forever." Now, I had never said to anybody, "I am homosexual." But to save my life, I did that. And it was wonderful that this man existed. And then I went back home to my parents and back to Galway. Right? When I was, things were extremely dangerous and dire in my family after that. And when I was 17, I walked out of high school, I started college. After the University of Arizona, nobody really noticed that I didn't have a high school diploma. And when they did, they said, you must take an extra English class. So fine. I met a poet, a woman who was Southern, magnetic, alcoholic, loved to enchant young gay men, and did. And we started to live together. And it was a crazy thing to do in a way, but it was also a way to escape a dangerous and difficult life and to sort of move forward in the world. And we were together for a number of years, 8 or so to be exact. And in my 20s, I started my real life.
And that takes us in a way to your days of 1981, and it's from my Alexandra, which is this lovely, wonderful urban poem. A lot of Mark's poems I find beautiful, terribly urban. There's a very strong urban New York feel even about the poem. Lovely urban poem about dating men and not sort of knowing the etiquette of that.
Exactly. People were just clueless about it because, where did one get that education, right? It wasn't readily available. I was quite clueless. So to enter into a gay culture meant to live in a city, which initially, a larger city, which I did not, and it meant to be open to diversity and to be to free oneself from the self-judgment that held me back from such knowledge, right? That was not an easy thing for me to do. I sort of wrote my way towards it, actually. I remember the first poem that I wrote, I was, my relationship with Ruth had come to an end. I was dating a British actor who was, this is in Des Moines, Iowa. He was there, which is the provinces, in case you don't know that. He was there working for the Iowa Arts Council, and we had gone to a string quartet concert at the Art Museum, and we'd gone for a walk afterwards in the cold in a rose garden near the Art Museum, and I wrote a poem about the music, the quartet, the flesh on our skin, the roses, and then it got to when our faces were the stubble, and the minute I wrote the word stubble into the poem, I had come out as a poet, but I had to figure out, now, was I writing, was that what my poem was about? Because I was kissing a man in the poem, was it now, the subject of the poem was homosexuality? Was it now a gay poem? It was, what happened to, I was already writing poems and publishing them, but now if I was being open in my poem, everything seemed to be transformed in some way. Eventually transformed for the better, right? But obviously, initially transformed into confusing fashion.
I want to go on a bit from that to like what you were saying earlier about 1986, and then I really struck with this poem that that you read on Tuesday, wasn't it? Lost in the Stars, which goes back to the snow of 1992.
Right.
I wonder whether you might talk about the snow of 1992 and Wally and
right. When I left Iowa, I moved to New York City. I had a yellow Chevette at $600. I was just going to make my way. And I luckily got a sort of part-time job teaching poetry at a program in Vermont, which was a low residency program. One just went there from time to time. And on the way, I stopped at a little town called Bellows Falls, Vermont. At that time, there was a gay hotel in Bellows Falls, which is an utter absurdity as an idea. So I went down to the bar. There was no one there. I was bored. I went back to my room. I was reading student poems, and I thought, I'll give it one more try. I walked in. There was one guy in the bar, and I didn't know that he was the love of my life. How did that happen? We walked out after we'd been dancing. We walked out for a while into this cold, frozen balcony, looking out over the empty railroad tracks in the snow. And I looked at him and I thought, there you are. Where have you been? It was this feeling of recognition for both of us, really. So in a while, complicated circumstances resolved themselves, and we wound up together. We lived in Boston for several years. We lived in Vermont for a number of years and had a home there. And after his HIV test, we moved to Provincetown, Massachusetts. Provincetown has been an artist colony for 100 years, a gay and lesbian resort, a place of refuge. And during the epidemic, there were real services there. There was help, and not only was there, concrete help, people who would come to your home and help get things done, but there was also this climate of acceptance. We were seen and honored as a couple. In Vermont, in the town where we lived, it was the capital of the state, but there was one case of AIDS, and that was a friend of ours, Bob, who had died his mother and sister took care of him until he died by themselves. There's no help at all. There were 6 cases in the whole state. So for us to get out of there, and I quit my job, we sold our house, I figured out some crazy way that I could commute to New York City once a week and teach and come back the rest of the week. It all worked out. And there we are in this town where suddenly, our situation is usual. All around us are couples where one or both are ill or may soon be ill. And there's a sense that we're going to be in this together. Provincetown is, have you been to Provincetown? Okay, so this is like one of the most lovely places in the world. It's on a spiral jetty of land that sticks 65 miles out into the Atlantic. The light is incredibly rich. It's a little white cottages, shingle roofs. It's a honky-tonk town, but it has a real beauty about it as well. So, and because people have been coming there for so long and feeling released from the strictures, the judgments, the impossibilities of life elsewhere in the United States. We people like the margins. We go to Provincetown and Key West and San Francisco. We go way out to the edges. That's it. You can be safe out of the edges, and you can look back at the mainland and see what you're missing. So Provincetown was very kind to us. So we had, that was the best decision I ever made. We had 3 good years, and then Wally started to get really sick. He developed an illness called progressive multifocal Leukoencephalopathy, which is a brain disease. A sort of ordinary organism in your liver migrates to the brain and causes a gradual paralysis. This disease almost doesn't exist anymore because of protease inhibitors. I've heard of 1 case in the intervening years. This because somebody wasn't taking medication. So for Wally, it meant gradually he couldn't walk, and then he was confined to his bed. And the gifts were that there was nothing to do for him. There was absolutely no treatment. His family said, "Why isn't he in the hospital? Well, for what?" So he could be in bed in the living room with 2 cats and 2 dogs and be surrounded by friends and people coming to visit him. And it was a very good send-off. After where am I going with this story?
I was just thinking, just to pause you there, because there's a lovely story in Dog Years, your beautiful memoir, of buying the dog for Wally.
Yeah.
Very, very touching.
We had just 1 dog at the time who was getting older and a little overweight and not so active. And Wally really wanted a puppy he could cuddle up. So we had friends, acquaintances, who were going to give up their Cocker Spaniel because they couldn't give him the exercise that he needed. And I went to get the Cocker Spaniel, and I said, "We just can't do it." They backed up. So on the way home, I went to the animal shelter in Brewster, Massachusetts, and there was this big golden retriever who was totally adorable and cute. And I sort of lied and said, "Of course, I could easily take care of this dog." Well, it turned out he didn't know his name. He did not know the word no. So that the minute he walked in the house, Wally had made this huge breakfast by a home health aide. It was ate bacon and eggs, all that stuff. The dog jumped in the bed and just ate it. So my friends thought I was crazy because I had this golden retriever who was completely clueless at a time when Wally was dying, basically. But Wally only lived another month. And then I had this creature who needed a walk and needed to to eat, needed to learn something about living in the social world, and didn't know a thing about grief. And nothing could have been better for me than to get me through that time. So to come way around to this, the original question, one of the things we could do in the days when we did nothing was to have benefits. We had no power to change a great illness. We had many, many benefits. There was a group of art who raised money for art supplies for gay men. And a friend of mine organized benefits for people who would come and they would sing or they would read poems or tell jokes, whatever it is they did. And I have a poem called Lost in the Stars, which is about one of those and the way that the appearance of a particular drag queen at that benefit became, for me, a kind of a mythic moment in which she was something larger than life. She was, in a way, the imagination itself, making a form to contain the kind of impossible grief and circumstance that we had no real way to manage at all. She sang beside the genius of the sea, as Wallace Stevens would have it in The Idea of Order at Key West. She was a figure who was there to organize our experience for us. Or at least I've turned her into that. She was actually a drag queen named Musty Chiffon, which I never could get in the poem because of the tonal problems. And when she read the poem, she said, "Are my breasts really that hard?" Which was not really the response what I would hope for.
And then I think your other poems, like Ararat, for instance, in Bethlehem in Broad Daylight, you say, any small thing can save you. And then in Tiara, the poem Tiara, you talk about the ordinary marvels of form and gravity. And of course, there's your important poem, A Display of Mackerel, and the wonderful poem No. I thought it'd be good to talk a bit more about these ordinary miracles, because they're there again and again in your work. Ordinary miracles, any small thing can save you.
Well, I believe that we fall asleep all the time to the extraordinary fact of just merely being here. And I appreciated in the meditation how you're reminding us that the weight of the body is on a chair. How often do you think about that, in the course of the day? But something about actually acknowledging that the weight of that one is the body, that the weight of that body is pressing down. Oh, here I am. Yeah. Something like that happens when we stop and see fish scales on the mackerel in the market, or the in the case of the poem Tiara, the pleasure of desire, how much delight we take in our interest and longing for another person. Tiara is a poem about a man I know who. Well, should I read it? Yeah. Let's do that because it'll make more sense. And it's a short poem. So this is my friend Peter Hollow was the first person I knew to have a panel made in the AIDS quilt in his memory. And he loved the royal family. So that gets him. That's funny in this context. So this poem is, my goodness, goes back a very long time now. This poem is from the mid-'80s. When very early on in the epidemic. Where is it? Peter died in a paper tiara cut from a book of princess paper dolls. He loved royalty, sashes, and jewels. "I don't know," he said when he woke in the hospice. "I was watching the Betty Davis Film Festival on Channel 57, and then at the wake, the tension broke, and someone guessed the casket closed because he was in there in a big wig and heels. And someone said, he's always late. He probably isn't here yet. He's still fixing his makeup." And someone said he asked for it. Asked for it. When all he did was go down into the salt tide of wanting as much as he wanted, giving himself over so drunk or stoned, it almost didn't matter who, though they were beautiful, stampeding into him in the simple, ravishing music of their hurry. I think heaven is perfect stasis poised over the realms of desire, where dreaming and waking men lie on the grass while wet horses roam among them, huge fragments of the music we die into in the body's paradise. Sometimes we wake not knowing how we came to be here, or who has crowned us with these temporary precious stones. And given the world's perfectly turned shoulders, the deep hollows glued by longing, given the irreplaceable silk of horses rippling in orchards, fruit thundering and chiming down, given the ordinary marvels of form and gravity, what could he do? What could any of us ever do but ask for it? So this is a historical moment when desire is just being demonized, right? That people who have HIV have brought it on themselves by just having too good a time, or by giving themselves over to desires of the body, which at least our American tradition teaches us are to be carefully measured and circumscribed. I was just appalled by that. It seemed like a point when it was important to affirm the beauty and dignity of desire, and I still feel that way.
Indeed. And then talking more about beauty, beauty so much it comes all the way through the poems, but particularly another theme that I think, and again afterwards I'm thinking this relates back to Stevens, is your feeling about the importance of arts generally, the consoling power of art. I was particularly struck by the poem Grosse Fugue, where Beethoven's Latest Quartet meets
Yeah.
But again and again, you want to place something like a late Beethoven quartet, later on the Messiah, next to the immediate.
Some of them, I think, probably the greatest beauty is made by hand, by the amateur, in the face of difficulty. We recognize the glory of Handel's Messiah or Beethoven's Opus 130, but there's something about the person who constructs a way of navigating the world at home, because he or she has to, with merely the materials at hand, that I find utterly compelling. And those characters appear in my work a great deal. I'll read you a poem later on about one of them, a drag queen in my neighborhood. I always remember a long story. There was a man in Tucson when I was growing up, an outsider artist who called himself the Mountain Gnome. He dressed all in black, and he made a little world he called the Valley of the Moon. And he would walk kids through it and show them talking birds and wooden fairies that came down on wires and ended in a shower of sparks, and he would pull a snake out of a hat. And I've never seen anything so beautiful, because it was a guy who was clearly an exile, an outsider, who made a realm that he could stand in and he could bring other people into it. To my mind, that's such a figure of what the artist is. That's what the poet is.
Indeed it is. Sort of coming back again to Deep Lane, which is the most recent collection that we've published here. You've published here. There's this lovely love poem, Verge, which seems to go back to My Alexandria. The dreadfully sad This Your Home Now poem. Wonder whether you might say something about those.
Sure. Well, Verge was written at the beginning of a new relationship. It's a poem about. I'm going to read you that too. It's really short. You can start the other one. This is a poem about this feeling. You meet people, and there might be on this new encounter this sort of iridescent edge of possibility, that feeling? Like, I could maybe fall in love with you. I haven't yet, but maybe. So this is Verge. A month at least before the bloom, and already 5 bare-limbed cherries ringed in a haze of incipient fire right by the highway. Middle of the afternoon, a faint pink bronze glow. Some things where they're becoming. The night we walked, nearly strangers, from a fevered party to the corner where you'd left your motorcycle, afraid some rough wind might knock it to the curb, you stood on the other side of the upright bike, the other side of what would be us, tilted your head toward me over the wet leather seat while you strapped your helmet on, engineer boots firm on the black pavement. Did we guess we'd taken the party's fire with us? Somewhere behind us, that dim apartment cooling around its core like a stone. Can you know when you're not even a bud, but poised at some brink? My April corona of new color, visible echo troubling the air by the roadway, little ripples of energy so new they're almost imagined. Could anyone driving in the departing gust and spatter on 7th have seen some cloud breathe out around us, as if we were a pair of, could it be, soon to flower trees? We flowered and then we stopped, but yeah. You're gonna
That goes. I'm just drawing it to a close, but I thought we'd sort of finish by asking, why do you write?
Oh,
You've written for a long, long time. You write poetry, you've written memoir, you've written criticism. Particularly poetry, why do you write it? There's still such a small audience for poetry now. Such a shame.
Poetry is the thing that I write that is not volitional. It has always been the thing that welled up, and it wells up. It gets started. Actually, in 2 places. It started in those songs that we talked about. Something in me wants to sing back or speak back, and then it started in reading poems. When I was, maybe 12, 13, I was stumbling across poems in the library. The little songs that the characters in Lord of the Rings sing, which seemed to me like they said more than they said, that there was somehow, I could understand them literally, but there was some kind of current of feeling or depth in them that drew me. And then you find the same thing in Blake and in 18th century Japanese haiku, and in many places, that feeling of comedy is another. There's something going on there that is of the spirit, and my spirit wanted to talk back to it, wanted to make something like that. Garcia Lorca, absolutely. So that, and now over time, writing poetry becomes it's what I do to know what I feel, what I think about things. It's an access to the inner life, and it's absolutely a gateway to the inner lives of others. Because if you are willing to open yourself and to give a forum to interiority, people meet you, which is just fantastic. I'm so much less alone as a writer than I would be otherwise. And finally, this is the side thing, because this is the thing I never expected. It isn't, I'm glad when people like it. What I love is when people use it. And this is so thrilling to me. People talk about how something that I've written helped get them through an experience of grief, and the mail around, particularly I wrote a memoir called Heaven's Coast, which was about Wally's death and the time thereafter. And I get so much mail which says, and still get, which says basically all the same thing. Thank you for telling your story. You said exactly how I felt, even though my circumstances are totally different than yours, and here they are. And that they're often, they range from a parent losing a child to someone coming to the end of a marriage, to a letter from a guy who could not go home because his country no longer existed. Right? He lived in a perpetual state of exile, and that state of exile brought with it a kind of grief you saw reflected in the book. This is an incredible thing to a writer. This is like soul company, and it means if people can find themselves in that, then you made something that is just larger than what my two hands here can do in the daily world. It's something that reaches out, and it moves across space, and it moves across time. This is remarkable. Like nothing better could happen to me. It's what I've just finished a writing book about Walt Whitman, who knew a lot about that particular experience, and he talks about distance avails not, time avails not. That if the poem does this thing, this mysterious thing it's supposed to do, then it becomes this meeting place between a voice that is sustained in time, even when the body of the poet isn't around anymore, and the reader can meet that voice. Oh, I can do that.
It's a great place to finish. Thank you very much.
Certainly.